June 12, 2025 began like any other day, but by nightfall, America's economic engine had ground to a halt. Factories across the country went dark, not from a market crash but from a sudden crippling shortage. The cause? Rare earth elements, 17 metals most Americans had never heard of, but which power everything from smartphones to fighter jets. Their absence was felt instantly. Automakers halted production, electronics firms warned of delays, and defense contractors sounded alarms. The crisis wasn't born overnight. It was the result of years of escalating trade tensions and over-reliance on a single foreign supplier. The silence on factory floors echoed a deeper realization. America's prosperity was more fragile than anyone had believed. Policymakers, caught off guard, scrambled for answers as the global supply chain, once a symbol of efficiency, became a source of vulnerability. The day the engine stopped was a wake-up call. In a world defined by interdependence, dependence can become a weapon. The intricate web that powered American industry had become its greatest risk. June 12 marked the moment America was forced to confront the true cost of its reliance on a strategic rival. The rare earth crisis was the inevitable climax of a trade war years in the making. What began as tariffs and counter-tariffs soon escalated into a battle over the very materials that fuel modern life. In April 2025, Beijing struck back against U.S. pressure by restricting exports of 7 key rare earth elements and the magnets made from them. With over 90% of global processing capacity, China's move was a surgical strike at America's industrial heart. Suddenly, the trade war wasn't about prices, it was about the ability to produce at all. Assembly lines stalled, just-in-time inventories collapsed, and the U.S. found itself unprepared for a blockade of essential materials. The message was clear. America's technological and military edge depended on resources controlled by its chief rival. The economic pain was immediate and severe, exposing a vulnerability that had been ignored for too long. The trade war had become a siege, fought not with tariffs but with the building blocks of the future. The U.S. was forced to reckon with the reality that prosperity could be turned off at the source. The era of taking supply for granted was over. China's dominance in rare earths wasn't an accident, it was a 40-year strategy. While rare earths aren't scarce, processing them is dirty, complex, and expensive. China undercut global competitors with low costs and lax regulations, driving others out of business. Today, Beijing controls nearly all global processing and magnet manufacturing, holding the keys to the technologies of the 21st century. These metals power electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, and advanced military hardware. The green energy transition and national defense both hinge on a steady supply of these elements. When China restricted exports, the world realized just how much it had traded resilience for efficiency. The West's dependence was exposed. The digital age and green revolution rested on ground controlled by a single gatekeeper. China's move was a demonstration of power, crippling rivals without firing a shot. The crisis forced a reckoning with the risks of outsourcing critical capabilities. America's technological strength had become a strategic liability. The crisis hit the U.S. economy with stunning speed. Ports clogged with idle containers, factories shuttered, and supply chains seized up almost overnight. Ford halted production of its electric vehicles, furloughing thousands. Suppliers and small businesses felt the shockwaves. The pain rippled through communities, lost wages, shuttered shops, and mounting anxiety for families. The promise of globalization was replaced by a sense of betrayal and vulnerability. $50 billion of GDP was suddenly at risk, but the true cost was measured in disrupted lives. The crisis revealed how deeply American prosperity depended on decisions made half a world away. The intricate choreography of modern manufacturing had been upended, leaving behind silent machinery and empty parking lots. The economic ecosystem that supported millions began to wither. The crisis eroded the sense of security that underpins society, fueling fear and division. The empty factories and idle ports became stark symbols of a broken promise. America was forced to confront the dangers of unchecked dependence. The vulnerability was no longer theoretical, it was painfully real. The nation's industrial base had been allowed to erode, and now the consequences were impossible to ignore. Under mounting pressure, Washington and Beijing struck a fragile truce. China eased some export restrictions, the U.S. reduced tariffs, but only slightly. The world exhaled, but the relief was shallow. Everyone knew this was just a pause, not a solution. The core issues, trade imbalances, intellectual property theft, and non-tariff barriers, remained unresolved. Businesses were left in limbo, unable to plan for the future on the back of a 90-day deal. Accusations of bad faith surfaced almost immediately, eroding what little trust remained. The truce did nothing to fix America's over-reliance on a strategic rival. China had shown it could weaponize supply chains at will. The temporary peace was a warning, not a resolution. America had a brief window to address its vulnerabilities, but the clock was ticking. The era of assuming global commerce would always trump rivalry was over. The crisis sparked a national drive for self-reliance. Supply chain resilience became a top priority for government and industry alike. The Pentagon led with a $500 million investment in domestic rare earth mining and processing. MP Materials fast-tracked expansion at Mountain Pass, aiming to close the loop and end reliance on China. Rebuilding this capability would take years, but the urgency was clear. America also looked abroad, forging new alliances with Australia and others to diversify supply. Friendshoring became the new mantra. Never again would the US trust a single source for critical materials. The challenge was immense. Capital, expertise, and political will were all needed. Regulatory reform and workforce training became national imperatives. The path to independence would be long and difficult, but the alternative was unacceptable. The crisis had changed the calculus. America could no longer afford to wait. The race for economic security had begun. The stakes were nothing less than the nation's future. The rare earth crisis marked the end of unfettered globalization. For decades, efficiency was king. Now, resilience and security are the new priorities. The world has entered an era of strategic competition, where economic dependencies are national security risks. Businesses are rethinking supply chains, building in redundancies, and accepting higher costs for greater stability. America must invest in domestic production, foster innovation, and work with allies to build secure supply networks. The lesson is clear: resilience is the new currency of power. The crisis exposed a critical weakness and forced a reckoning with the costs of globalization. Rebuilding America's industrial base is now a national mission. The challenge is daunting, but the opportunity is historic. By learning from this crisis, the US can emerge stronger and more secure. The day the engine stopped must be remembered as the day America started building a more durable future. The race for resilience has only just begun.